The relentless summer sun bore down on Willow Greene as she stepped off the stagecoach, clutching her 6-month-old son Samuel to her chest. Her heart pounded against her ribs as she surveyed the dusty main street of Copper Ridge, Wyoming Territory, 1878. This was at the place where her new life would either flourish or wither like the sparse vegetation dotting the harsh landscape around her. "So you're the mail-order bride," the stagecoach driver said, dropping her worn carpetbag onto the dirt with a thud. His eyes lingered on Samuel, who was beginning to fuss from the heat. "Didn't mention nothing about a baby in them letters, I reckon." Willow swallowed hard, forcing her chin up. "My situation changed after the correspondence began," the driver snorted. "Reckon it did." He tipped his hat and climbed back onto his perch, leaving Willow alone with her child and her secrets. Copper Ridge was smaller than she had imagined, a collection of weathered buildings strung along a single dirt road like beads on a string. The promised land that would save her from destitution back east seemed little more than a frontier outpost clinging to existence. A group of women gathered outside the general store turned to stare as she made her way down the street. Their whispers carried on the hot breeze. "That's her." "She's brought a baby. Poor Ethan Irwin won't be pleased about that." Willow clutched Samuel tighter. Ethan Irwin, her intended husband, a man she knew only through a handful of letters, described as a hard-working rancher with a decent spread just outside of town. A man who had no idea she was arriving with a child. The town's small hotel stood at the far end of the street, and Willow headed toward it. She needed somewhere to gather herself before meeting Ethan. The weight of Samuel in her arms and the carpetbag dragging at her shoulder made the walk feel endless. "Need some help with that bag, madam?" The deep voice startled her. She turned to find a tall man with shoulders as broad as an oak door. His face was partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat, but she could see the line of a strong jaw covered in a few days' worth of stubble. "I'm fine, thank you," she replied automatically, though her aching arm suggested otherwise. The man stepped closer, and she saw his eyes were the color of a summer storm gray with hints of blue. "No offense intended, madam, but you look about ready to drop." Before she could protest further, he reached down and took her carpetbag. "Heading to the hotel?" "Yes, thank you, Mr. Irwin, Ethan Irwin." He tipped his hat. "And you must be Willow Greene." Her heart sank. Of all the ways she had imagined their first meeting, this was not one of them. Her disheveled from travel, Samuel fussing against her shoulder, and the man she had promised to marry finding her before she could compose herself. "Mr. Irwin," she managed, "I apologize for my appearance." The journey was longer than expected. His gaze moved to Samuel, whose tiny fist was curled against her dress. Something flickered across his face, surprise, certainly, but Willow couldn't read what followed. Disappointment, anger, suspicion. "You didn't mention a child in your letters," he said finally. "No," she admitted. "I did not." Samuel chose that moment to let out a wail, his patience with the heat and strange surroundings exhausted. Willow bounced him gently, trying to soothe him. "Perhaps we should get you both out of this heat," Ethan said after a moment, his voice carefully neutral. "The hotel has a dining room. We can talk there." Relief washed over her that he hadn't immediately rejected her, though she knew the worst was yet to come. She followed him to the hotel, acutely aware of the curious stares of townspeople. By nightfall, everyone in Copper Ridge would know that Ethan Irwin's mail-order bride had arrived with an unexpected addition. The hotel dining room was mercifully empty when they entered. Ethan pulled out a chair for her at a corner table, then set her bag down and took the seat opposite. A weary-looking woman approached, eyeing Samuel with undisguised curiosity. "Coffee for both of us, Mrs. Hollister," Ethan said, "and perhaps some milk for the little one." "I have goat's milk in the kitchen," the woman replied, still staring at Samuel. "That would be fine, thank you," Willow said, grateful for the small kindness. When Mrs. Hollister had gone, silence fell between them. Samuel had quieted, his blue eyes wide as he took in the new surroundings. "His name is Samuel," Willow said finally. "He's 6 months old." Ethan nodded slowly. "I see, and his father," the question she had been dreading. Willow took a deep breath. "Dead. He was my husband, Thomas. We were married for less than a year when influenza took him last winter." It wasn't entirely a lie. Thomas had been her husband briefly, though their marriage had been one of convenience rather than love. What she omitted was that Samuel had come to her through tragedy, not birth. "I'm sorry for your loss," Ethan said, studying her face. "It must have been difficult." "It was." She met his gaze steadily. "After Thomas died, I had few options. When I saw your advertisement for a wife, it seemed like providence, but you chose not to mention Samuel in your reply. Would you have considered me if I had?" The directness of her question seemed to surprise him. He leaned back in his chair, considering. Truthfully, probably not. At least he was honest. "That's why I didn't tell you," she admitted. "I needed a fresh start somewhere far from Pittsburgh. Samuel deserves a better life than what I could provide for him there, Mrs. Hollister returned with their coffee and a small cup of milk. She lingered a moment too long, her curiosity palpable, before Ethan's pointed look sent her away. "So what happens now, Mr. Irwin?" Willow asked when they were alone again. "I understand if you wish to nullify our agreement." "I can work as a seamstress or laundress until I earn enough to move on." Ethan took a long sip of his coffee before answering. "My ranch needs a woman's touch and I need a wife. That hasn't changed." He glanced at Samuel, "But a baby complicates things." "He's a good baby," she said quickly. "Rarely cries except when he's hungry or tired." "I know nothing about raising children, neither did I 6 months ago." She managed a small smile. "We learn." He studied her face, then Samuel's, as if searching for something. Whatever it was, he seemed to find it because his expression softened slightly. "The minister is expecting us tomorrow afternoon," he said. "That is, if you still wish to proceed." Hope fluttered in her chest. "You're willing to marry me, even with Samuel?" "I made a commitment, Miss Greene." "I'm not in the habit of breaking my word." He paused. "But there's something you should know. People in this town talk, and they'll talk plenty about you arriving with a child." "I'm no stranger to gossip, Mr. Irwin. Call me Ethan." He leaned forward. "The thing is, Willow, in a place like this, reputation matters, not just for me, but for you and the boy, too." She tensed. "What are you suggesting?" "Nothing improper," he assured her. "Just that we present a united front. If anyone asks, we'll say we knew about Samuel all along. That I'm prepared to raise him as my own." Willow stared at him, surprised by the offer. "Why would you do that?" "Because starting off with the whole town thinking I was tricked into taking on another man's child isn't good for any of us." His voice was matter of fact, but there was a kindness in his eyes she hadn't expected. "Besides, once we're married, he'll be my responsibility anyway. Might as well embrace it from the start." Tears pricked at her eyes and she blinked them away. "That's very generous of you." "It's practical," he corrected, though the slight softening around his mouth suggested there might be more to it. "Now, I've arranged a room for you here tonight. I'll come by in the morning to take you out to see the ranch before the wedding, if that suits you." "That would be fine." She hesitated. "Ethan, I want you to know I didn't come here to burden you. I'm a hard worker. I can cook and sew and manage a household. I'll earn my keep, and Samuel's too." He stood, placing his hat back on his head. "I don't doubt it. Rest well, Willow. Tomorrow will be a long day." After he'd gone, Willow sat in the quiet dining room, Samuel dozing against her shoulder. She had gambled everything on this journey west, and while Ethan hadn't sent her packing, she sensed his reservations. He was a man of his word, willing to honor their agreement despite the surprise of Samuel, but that didn't mean he welcomed them with open arms. As she climbed the stairs to her room, Samuel heavy in her arms, she wondered if she'd made a terrible mistake. But what choice did she have? Back in Pittsburgh, there had been nothing but debt and disgrace waiting for her. At least here, there was a chance, slim as it might be, for something better. She settled Samuel on the narrow bed, building a barrier of pillows to keep him from rolling off. As she unpacked her meager belongings, she heard voices in the street below. Curious, she moved to the window. A group of men stood outside the saloon across the way. Ethan was among them, his tall figure unmistakable. One of the men clapped him on the shoulder, saying something that made the others laugh. Ethan's stance was stiff, his response too quiet for her to hear. Another man, short and barrel-chested, made an exaggerated rocking motion with his arms, clearly mimicking holding a baby. More laughter followed, louder this time. Willow's cheeks burned. They were mocking him, mocking them. Ethan said something sharply, and the laughter died down. He turned away from the group, heading down the street with long, angry strides. Willow stepped back from the window, her stomach tight with anxiety. This was only the beginning. Tomorrow she would become Mrs. Ethan Irwin, and they would face much more than a few drunken taunts together. For Samuel's sake, she had to make this work, for her own sake too. Because the alternative failure, destitution, shame was unthinkable. The morning arrived with a sky so intensely blue it hurt to look at it. Willow had slept poorly, her mind racing with worries about the day ahead. Samuel, however, had slept soundly once fed, untroubled by the life-altering changes taking place around him. She dressed in her best clothes, a dark blue dress with minimal adornment, practical but flattering. Her honey blonde hair, usually pinned severely at the nape of her neck, she arranged in a softer style. This was, after all, her wedding day, unusual as the circumstances might be. A knock at the door came precisely at 8 o'clock. Ethan stood in the hallway, hat in hand, looking surprisingly smart in a clean white shirt and dark vest. His hair, the color of burnished copper, was neatly combed. "Good morning," he said, his eyes taking in her appearance with a flicker of appreciation. "I hope you slept well." "Well enough, thank you." She stepped back to let him see Samuel, who was sitting on the bed, happily playing with a wooden spoon she'd borrowed from the kitchen. "We're ready whenever you are." Ethan nodded, then surprised her by entering the room and approaching Samuel directly. He crouched down to the baby's level. "Hello there, young man," he said, his deep voice gentled. "You and I haven't been properly introduced. I'm Ethan." Samuel stared at him with wide eyes, then offered the spoon with a gurgling laugh. "Thank you," Ethan said seriously, pretending to take it before giving it back. "Very generous of you." Something about the simple interaction made Willow's throat tighten. She hadn't expected such gentle consideration from this rugged rancher. "He seems to like you," she said. Ethan straightened up. "I had younger siblings, been a while, but I remember a little about babies." He cleared his throat. "The buggy's outside when you're ready. I thought we'd drive out to the ranch first, let you see the place before we go to the minister's." The day was warming quickly as they left the hotel. Several people on the street stopped to stare as Ethan helped Willow into the buggy, handing Samuel up to her before climbing in himself. She held her head high, refusing to be cowed by their curious gazes. "Quite the spectacle, aren't we?" she murmured as Ethan flicked the reins, setting the horse in motion. "They'll find something new to gossip about soon enough," he replied. "Small towns always do." They traveled in silence for a while, the buggy bumping along the rutted road leading out of town. The landscape opened up around them, rolling grassland dotted with sagebrush, the distant mountains sharp against the sky. "How far is your ranch?" Willow asked, breaking the silence. "About 3 miles out of town. Not the biggest spread in the territory, but decent enough. Good water source, decent grazing. And you manage it alone?" "I have 2 hired hands brothers, Jack and Henry Miller. Good men, work hard. They have a cabin on the property." He glanced at her. "And there's Mrs. Cooper, who comes in from town twice a week to help with washing and such. Though I expect with you there now, that might change. I'm happy to take on those duties," she assured him. "As I said, I'm no stranger to hard work." He nodded, seeming satisfied. "The house isn't grand, but it's solid. Built it myself when I first claimed the land 5 years ago. Added on as I could. You've been here 5 years. You're not originally from Wyoming then?" "No, grew up in Missouri, came west after the war." She wanted to ask which side he'd fought for, but thought better of it. "The war had ended 13 years ago, but the wounds it left were still raw for many." "And your family?" "Parents passed on. Sister married a shopkeeper in Denver." He kept his eyes on the road. "What about you? Any family back east?" "None to speak of." It wasn't entirely true she had a cousin in Philadelphia, but they'd never been close, and Willow had severed that connection when she left. "It's just Samuel and me now." The road crested a small hill, and suddenly the ranch came into view, a sturdy log house with a porch running its length, a large barn, several corrals and outbuildings. Smoke rose from the chimney, and cattle grazed in the distance. It wasn't grand, as he'd said, but it was well kept and more substantial than she had dared hope. "There it is," Ethan said, a note of pride in his voice. "Irwin Ranch. It's lovely," she said sincerely. He smiled for the first time that day, a genuine smile that transformed his weathered face and made him look younger. Wait until you see inside. The house was indeed modest but meticulously maintained. 4 rooms, downstairs a kitchen with a large hearth, a dining area, a sitting room with bookshelves which surprised and pleased her, and Ethan's office. Upstairs were 2 bedrooms and a small room that might serve as a nursery for Samuel. I had Mrs. Cooper air out the bedrooms and put fresh linens on the beds, Ethan explained as he showed her around. The larger one will be ours, of course. The smaller one can be Samuel's when he's older. Ours. The word hung between them, a reminder of the commitment they were about to make. Willow felt a blush creep up her neck at the implication. Ethan seemed to notice her discomfort. I've had a crib made for him, he said, changing the subject. It's in our room for now. Thought it would be easier that way. The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched her. You've gone to a lot of trouble, he shrugged. Wanted things to be ready for you both. They continued the tour, Ethan showing her the spring house where milk and butter were kept cool, the vegetable garden that needed attention, the chicken coop where a dozen hens provided eggs. It was a working ranch, every aspect of it designed for practicality rather than beauty, but Willow could see the care that had gone into building it. What do you think? Ethan asked as they stood on the porch surveying the property. Can you be happy here? It was a surprisingly vulnerable question from a man who had thus far seemed so stoic. Willow looked at him, really looked at him, the strength in his tall frame, the intelligence in his gray-blue eyes, the way his hands, calloused from work, had been so gentle with Samuel. I believe I can, she said honestly. It's more than I hoped for. Something in his expression eased. Good, we should head back to town if we want to keep our appointment with Reverend Walsh. The wedding itself was a brief affair, conducted in the small white church on the edge of town. Mrs. Cooper served as one witness, Henry Miller as the other. Samuel sat contentedly in Mrs. Cooper's lap during the ceremony, fascinated by her spectacles. Reverend Walsh raised an eyebrow when he saw the baby but made no comment as he led them through their vows. Willow's voice trembled slightly as she promised to love, honor, and obey a man she had known for less than a day. Ethan's voice was steady, his hand warm and firm around hers. I now pronounce you man and wife, the Reverend declared. Mr. Irwin, you may kiss your bride. Ethan hesitated for just a moment before leaning in to place a brief, chaste kiss on her lips. It was nothing more than a formality, yet Willow felt a surprising flutter in her stomach at the contact. Congratulations to you both, Reverend Walsh said, closing his Bible. May God bless your union and your family. Family. The word echoed in Willow's mind as they stepped out of the church into the afternoon sunlight. They were a family now, she, Ethan, and Samuel bound together by vows and legal documents, if not by blood or shared history. A small crowd had gathered outside the church, curiosity overcoming propriety. Whispers followed them as Ethan helped Willow and Samuel into the buggy. Did you hear? He's taking on another man's child. Must be desperate for a wife to accept such baggage. Poor fool doesn't know what he's getting into. Willow's cheeks burned with humiliation, but Ethan's expression remained impassive as he climbed up beside her and took the reins. Best get used to it, he said quietly as they pulled away. Small towns have long memories. I didn't expect them to be so openly cruel, she admitted. People fear what's different, what they don't understand, he glanced at her. But they'll come around once they get to know you, and if they don't, then to hell with them, he said with unexpected vehemence. We don't need their approval to live our lives. The words, rough as they were, comforted her. At least in this, it seemed they were aligned, unwilling to bow to the judgment of others. They stopped at the general store on the way out of town, where Ethan had arranged for supplies to be prepared for them. The proprietor, a thin man with spectacles perched on the end of his nose, eyed Willow and Samuel with undisguised curiosity as he loaded their purchases into the buggy. Congratulations on your nuptials, Irwin, the man said. Quite the ready-made family you've got yourself. Thank you, Phillips, Ethan replied coolly. My wife and son appreciate your good wishes. The emphasis he placed on my wife and son was subtle but unmistakable. He was claiming Samuel as his own, just as he had promised. The shopkeeper's eyebrows shot up, but he said nothing more. As they drove away from town toward the ranch toward home, Willow corrected herself. The tension that had built in her shoulders began to ease. The worst was over. They were married. She and Samuel had a roof over their heads, food to eat, and a man who, if not affectionate, at least seemed honorable and kind. It was more than many women in her situation could hope for. The sun was beginning to set when they arrived back at the ranch. The golden light bathed the buildings in a warm glow, making the modest homestead look almost magical. Two men, the Miller brothers, she presumed were in the corral working with a horse. They waved as the buggy approached. "I'll introduce you properly tomorrow," Ethan said. "For now, let's get you and Samuel settled in." He carried their purchases inside while Willow followed with Samuel, who was growing fussy after the long day. The house felt different now that it was hers, intimidating in its unfamiliarity, yet full of possibility. "I'll stable the horse and be back shortly," Ethan said, setting down the last of the parcels. "Make yourself at home." Alone in the house, Willow took a deep breath. This was at the beginning of her new life as Mrs. Ethan Irwin. She looked down at Samuel, who gazed back at her with trusting eyes. "We're going to be all right," she told him softly. "I promise you that." She set about warming milk for Samuel and unpacking the food they'd brought from town. By the time Ethan returned, she had a simple supper laid out on the table: bread, cheese, cold ham, and applesauce. "It's not much of a wedding feast," she apologized as he washed up at the basin. "It's perfect," he assured her, taking a seat at the table. "I'm not one for fuss." They ate in companionable silence, the only sounds Samuel's occasional babbles and the distant lowing of cattle. It was strange, Willow thought, how comfortable the silence was between them, given how little they knew each other. After supper, Ethan showed her the crib. He'd made a sturdy pine construction with a small mattress stuffed with clean straw and covered with soft flannel sheets. "Jack Miller's wife was handy with a needle before she passed," Ethan explained. "Left behind some baby things they never used, said I was welcome to them." Willow ran her hand over the tiny quilt that lined the crib. "It's beautiful, thank you." She bathed Samuel in a small tub by the fire, then dressed him in a clean nightgown and laid him in his new crib. He fussed briefly before settling into sleep, exhausted from the day's excitement. With Samuel asleep, an awkward tension descended on the room. Ethan stood by the window, looking out at the darkening landscape, while Willow busied herself unpacking her few belongings. "I'll sleep in the office tonight," he said suddenly, turning to face her. "Give you time to adjust." Surprise and relief mingled in her response. "That's very considerate of you. We're strangers yet," he said simply. "No need to rush things," she nodded, grateful for his understanding. "Thank you, Ethan, for everything. You've been kinder than I had any right to expect." He moved to the door, pausing with his hand on the knob. "I meant what I said in town, about Samuel being my son now." His voice was gruff with an emotion she couldn't quite identify. "We'll raise him together, Willow, make a good life for him here." The promise in his words brought tears to her eyes. "I believe we will." After he'd gone, Willow stood in the quiet bedroom, looking at Samuel sleeping peacefully in his crib. For the first time since she'd fled Pittsburgh, she felt a cautious hope blooming in her heart. This marriage might have begun as an arrangement of convenience, but perhaps in time it could grow into something more. The days that followed fell into a rhythm that was both strange and comforting. Willow rose early before the sun to tend to Samuel and prepare breakfast. Ethan would already be outside, seeing to the morning chores. They would eat together, sometimes joined by Jack and Henry, before Ethan headed out to work the cattle or mend fences or any of the countless tasks that kept the ranch running. Willow spent her days learning the household, where things were kept, how Ethan liked his shirts laundered, what supplies needed replenishing. Mrs. Cooper came on Tuesday, eyeing Willow with thinly veiled curiosity as she showed her the particulars of running the ranch house. "He's a good man, Mr. Irwin," the older woman said as they hung washing on the line behind the house. "Not one for talking much, but steady as they come." "I'm beginning to see that," Willow replied, pinning one of Samuel's tiny shirts to the line, "Mrs." Cooper glanced at the baby, who was napping in a basket nearby. "The boy favors you, got your eyes." It was an innocent observation, but it made Willow's stomach clench. Everyone says so, she responded, hoping her voice sounded natural. Town's all abuzz about you too, Mrs. Cooper continued, never one to miss an opportunity for gossip. Some folks wondering why Mr. Irwin would take on another man's child, others saying it shows his character. And what do you think, Mrs. Cooper? The older woman straightened, hands on her ample hips. I think it's not my business, nor anyone else's. A child needs a father, and if Mr. Irwin's willing to step up, that's between him and the Lord. It was a kinder response than Willow had expected, and she felt a rush of gratitude toward the plain-spoken woman. Thank you, she said simply, Mrs. Cooper nodded, then turned the conversation to practical matters: the best day to bake bread given the temperamental oven, where to find wild berries when they came into season, which local families might have chickens to sell come spring. In the evenings, after supper, Willow and Ethan would sit on the porch if the weather was fair, or by the fire if it wasn't. They talked little at first, the silence between them comfortable but heavy with unasked questions. Ethan slept in his office that first week, though Willow had told him it wasn't necessary. When you're ready, he'd said. Not before. It was a consideration she hadn't expected and made her wonder about the man she'd married. He was kind but reserved, sharing little of himself beyond the practicalities of ranch life. He was good with Samuel, though gentle and patient, even when the baby woke in the night crying. On their 10th day as husband and wife, Willow decided it was time to venture into town. They needed supplies, and she couldn't hide from the townsfolk forever. I'll come with you, Ethan said when she mentioned her plans at breakfast. There's no need, she assured him. I'm perfectly capable of handling the wagon and shopping on my own. I know that, he replied. But your first time in town as Mrs. Irwin shouldn't be alone. People talk less when I'm around. She wanted to argue to prove her independence, but the truth was she was grateful for the offer. Thank you. I would appreciate the company. The trip into Copper Ridge was uneventful until they reached the general store. As they entered, conversation died abruptly, making it clear they had been the topic of discussion. Willow held her head high, Samuel on her hip, as she greeted Mr. Phillips. Good morning, Mr. Phillips. I hope you're well today. The shopkeeper adjusted his spectacles. Mrs. Irwin. Yes, quite well. What can I help you with? She handed him the list she had prepared, ignoring the stares of the other customers, 2 women whose names she didn't yet know and an elderly man examining a display of pipes. How's the little one adjusting to ranch life? Phillips asked as he gathered her items, his tone overly casual. Very well, thank you, she replied. He seems to thrive in the fresh air. Good. Strong constitution, I expect, takes after his father. The implication was clear: which father did the child take after? Ethan, who had been examining a new plow blade, turned at the comment. Samuel favors his mother, he said evenly. Got her eyes and her spirit. Of course, Phillips backpedaled. Fine boy, regardless. One of the women, middle-aged, with a pinched face beneath an elaborate bonnet, stepped forward. Mrs. Irwin, I don't believe we've been introduced. I'm Margaret Whitley, chairwoman of the Ladies' Aid Society. Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Whitley, Willow replied, shifting Samuel to her other hip. We meet every Thursday afternoon at the church, Mrs. Whitley continued. Charitable works, you understand. We'd be delighted to have you join us. The invitation surprised Willow. It was the first overture of friendship she'd received since arriving in Copper Ridge. That's very kind of you. Of course, bringing a child might be disruptive, Mrs. Whitley added, her gaze flicking to Samuel. Perhaps you could leave him with someone? My son goes where his mother goes, Ethan interjected, coming to stand beside Willow. At least for now. Mrs. Whitley's smile tightened. I see. Well, the invitation stands regardless. After they had paid for their purchases and loaded them into the wagon, Willow turned to Ethan. Thank you for that. For what? Standing up for Samuel. For us. He shrugged, though she could see the tension in his shoulders. Like I said, we present a united front. Is it always going to be like this? She asked as they climbed onto the wagon seat. People judging, making assumptions, for a while, he admitted. Until something more interesting comes along for them to gossip about, he glanced at her. Does it bother you so much? Not for myself, she said. But for Samuel, and for you, it's not fair that you should bear the brunt of their judgment for a choice you made out of kindness. I knew what I was getting into, he said simply, flicking the reins to set the horses in motion. But did he? Willow wondered. Did either of them truly understand what they had committed to when they spoke their vows? That night, after Samuel was asleep in his crib, Willow found Ethan on the porch, smoking a cigarette as he gazed at the star-filled sky. She joined him, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the evening chill. "Beautiful night," she commented. He nodded, exhaling a stream of smoke. "One of the things I love about this place, you can see every star God ever made. In Pittsburgh, the smoke from the factories blocks most of the stars," she said. "I'd forgotten how bright they could be." They stood in companionable silence for a while, listening to the night sounds, the distant howl of a coyote, the soft rustle of wind through prairie grass. "Ethan," she said finally, gathering her courage, "I think it's time we discussed certain aspects of our arrangement." He turned to look at her, his expression unreadable in the darkness. "What aspects would those be?" "Our marriage," she said directly. "It's been over a week and you're still sleeping in your office." He dropped his cigarette and ground it out beneath his boot. "I told you I'm waiting until you're ready. And if I said I was ready now," the words hung between them, charged with meaning. She heard him inhale sharply. "Are you?" He asked, his voice lower than before. Was she? Willow considered the question honestly. She barely knew this man, yet in the short time they'd been married, he had shown himself to be honorable, kind, and patient. More than that, he had accepted Samuel without reservation, claiming him publicly as his own son. "Yes," she said simply. "I am." He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth of his body in the cool night air. "Willow, I don't want you to feel obligated." "Our arrangement is a marriage," she interrupted. "A real one in the eyes of the law and God, and I would like it to be real in all ways." His hand came up to cup her cheek, calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "I would like that too," he admitted, "very much." When he kissed her this time, it was nothing like the brief, formal kiss they had shared at their wedding. This kiss was warm and searching, tentative at first, then deepening as she responded. His arms went around her waist, drawing her closer, and she felt a flutter of desire that both surprised and delighted her. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing faster. Ethan rested his forehead against hers. "Are you sure about this? There's no rush." "I'm sure," she whispered. "I want to be a true wife to you, Ethan." He took her hand and led her inside, through the quiet house to the bedroom they would now truly share. Samuel slept peacefully in his crib, oblivious to the momentous shift taking place between the adults. That night, Willow discovered that Ethan's strength was matched by his gentleness, his passion tempered by consideration. When it was over, she lay in the circle of his arms, her head on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart. "Thank you," he murmured against her hair. "For what?" "For taking a chance on me, on us." His arms tightened around her. "I know this isn't what you imagined for yourself, but I promise I'll do right by you and Samuel." "I know you will," she said, and realized she truly believed it. As she drifted towards sleep, Willow felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in a long time. This marriage might have begun as a practical arrangement, but something deeper was growing between them, something that, given time and care, might even become love. Spring gave way to summer, and with it came long, sun-drenched days of work and simple pleasures. The ranch thrived under Ethan's careful management, and Willow found herself settling into the rhythm of ranch life with surprising ease. Samuel grew stronger each day, his baby babbles evolving into recognizable sounds. "Ma-ma" was his first word, followed closely by "Ita" for Ethan, which brought an unexpected sheen of tears to the rancher's eyes the first time he heard it. "He's calling me by name," Ethan had said, wonder in his voice as he swung the laughing baby into the air. "He's claiming you as his," Willow had replied. "As am I." Their relationship had deepened since that night on the porch. Ethan remained reserved by nature, but with Willow, he had begun to open up, sharing stories of his childhood in Missouri. His experiences during the war, he had fought for the Union, she learned, and his dreams for the ranch. In turn, she told him about her life in Pittsburgh, though she carefully edited certain parts, particularly those concerning Samuel's parentage. It wasn't a complete deception. Thomas had been her husband briefly, and she had been widowed. But Samuel was not Thomas's child, nor was he hers by birth. The truth weighed on her more heavily as her feelings for Ethan grew. He deserved honesty, yet she feared what that honesty might cost her cost them all. The opportunity to confess came on a sweltering August afternoon. Ethan had taken Samuel with him to check on a new calf, giving Willow time to bake for the upcoming harvest supper at the church. The Ladies' Aid Society had finally accepted her, largely due to Mrs. Cooper's staunch support, and Willow had promised to bring 3 pies. She was elbow-deep in flour when a rider approached the house. Through the window, she saw a man she didn't recognize, tall and lean, with dark hair and a city cut to his clothes. He dismounted with the awkward movements of someone unaccustomed to horseback and approached the house. Wiping her hands on her apron, Willow went to the door. "Can I help you, sir?" The man removed his hat, revealing a handsome face with sharp features. "I'm looking for Willow Greene. I was told in town she might be found here." A chill ran down her spine despite the heat of the day. "I'm Willow Irwin now, and you are James Harrington," he replied, his accent marking him as Eastern. "From Pittsburgh, I'm a lawyer representing the estate of Thomas Greene." The world seemed to tilt beneath her feet. "Thomas has been dead for nearly a year. His estate was settled before I left." "Not entirely." Harrington's eyes were shrewd. "May I come in? This is a delicate matter." She wanted to refuse, but knew it would only postpone the inevitable. Stepping aside, she gestured him in. "Please be brief, Mr. Harrington. My husband will be returning soon." "Husband." He repeated the word with a slight emphasis. "Yes, I heard in town you had remarried, quite quickly too." The insinuation made her bristle. "State your business, Mr. Harrington." He placed his hat on the table and withdrew a folded document from his jacket. "I represent Thomas's cousin, Edward Greene. He is contesting the guardianship of the child known as Samuel Greene." Willow's hand flew to her throat. "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that you have no legal right to the boy." Harrington's voice was cool, clinical. "Edward Greene is aware that Samuel is not your natural child, nor was he Thomas's. The boy was orphaned in the influenza outbreak and taken in by you and Thomas shortly before Thomas's own death. With Thomas gone, Edward believes the child should be raised by blood relations, specifically himself." The room seemed to close in around her. "That's not true," she managed, though the denial sounded hollow even to her own ears. "Isn't it?" Harrington raised an eyebrow. "We have affidavits from 3 neighbors who will testify that you and Thomas took in an orphaned infant just weeks before Thomas died, that you had no children of your own, that Samuel's real parents were Michael and Catherine Walsh, both victims of the influenza." Her legs suddenly weak, Willow sank into a chair. "What does Edward want?" "As I said, guardianship of the boy." "Why? Edward never cared for Thomas. They were hardly more than strangers." Harrington adjusted his cuffs, seemingly uncomfortable. "The Greene family name has certain obligations attached to it. A male heir is desirable, so Samuel is to be a pawn in some family legacy game." Anger flared through her fear. "I won't allow it." "You may not have a choice, Mrs. Irwin. Your claim to the child is tenuous at best, especially given the circumstances of your departure from Pittsburgh." The implied threat was clear. He knew she had fled with Samuel, knew she had no legal right to him. "Samuel is my son now," she said, rising from the chair. "Mine and my husband's, we have papers." "Based on falsehoods," Harrington countered. "Once those are exposed, what's going on here?" Ethan's voice from the doorway made them both turn. He stood there, Samuel in his arms, his expression darkening as he took in the scene. "Ethan," Willow said, her voice unsteady. "This is Mr. Harrington, a lawyer from Pittsburgh." Harrington stepped forward, extending his hand. "James Harrington, representing Edward Greene in the matter of his young cousin, Samuel." Ethan ignored the outstretched hand, his gaze moving to Willow's pale face. "Samuel is my son." "Legally, perhaps," Harrington conceded. "But based on fraudulent information, I'm afraid, the child is neither yours nor your wife's by birth." A heavy silence fell over the room. Samuel, sensing the tension, began to whimper. Ethan bounced him gently, shushing him, his eyes never leaving Willow's face. "I think you'd better explain," he said quietly, Willow's heart hammered in her chest. "Ethan, perhaps I should give you privacy," Harrington interjected. I'm staying at the hotel in town. I'll call again tomorrow to discuss the matter further. You do that, Ethan said, his voice hard. And in the meantime, understand this. That boy doesn't leave this ranch. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. Clear? Harrington retrieved his hat. Crystal clear, Mr. Irwin, but I should warn you, opposing Edward Greene can be costly. Get out, Ethan said simply. When the lawyer had gone, silence descended on the kitchen. Samuel had quieted, his head resting against Ethan's shoulder, one small hand clutching his shirt. Is it true? Ethan asked finally. Is Samuel not your son? The moment she had dreaded had arrived. Willow took a deep breath. Not by birth, no. Ethan's expression didn't change, but she saw something flicker in his eyes, hurt, disappointment, anger, she couldn't tell. Explain. She gestured toward the table. You should sit. It's a long story. He sat, still holding Samuel, who was beginning to doze in the afternoon heat. Willow remained standing, needing the distance as she prepared to reveal the truth she had hidden for so long. Thomas and I married young, she began. It wasn't a love match, but it was respectable. His family had money but needed the social connections my family offered. I needed security after my parents died. Ethan nodded, his face impassive. We had been married for 8 months when the influenza outbreak hit Pittsburgh. It was devastating, entire families wiped out in days. She swallowed hard, remembering the horror of those weeks. Thomas and I volunteered at a makeshift hospital. That's where we met the Walshes, Michael, Catherine, and their son, Samuel, who was just 2 months old then. She moved to the stove, more to have something to do with her hands than because the tea needed tending. Michael died first, then Catherine 3 days later. Before she died, she begged me to look after Samuel just until her sister could come from Ohio to claim him. But the sister never came, Ethan guessed. She had died in the same outbreak, Willow confirmed. We didn't know that at the time. When no one came for Samuel, Thomas and I decided to keep him. Thomas had always wanted children, and I had fallen in love with this tiny baby who had lost everything. She poured tea with shaking hands. We were making plans to legally adopt him when Thomas fell ill. The influenza took him within days. I'm sorry, Ethan said softly. After Thomas died, his cousin Edward appeared. He had never shown any interest in Thomas during his life, but suddenly he was very concerned about Thomas's estate and particularly about Samuel. Willow's voice hardened. He made it clear that, as Thomas's heir, he considered Samuel part of the inheritance. Like property, Ethan said, disgust evident in his tone. Exactly. I couldn't bear the thought of that sweet boy being raised by a man who saw him as nothing more than a means to further the family name. She looked directly at Ethan. So I took what money Thomas had left me, gathered what belongings I could carry, and fled. I came west because it was as far from Pittsburgh as I could get. And you answered my advertisement. Yes. She sat down across from him, finally meeting his eyes. I knew it was wrong to deceive you. I told myself it was necessary, that I was protecting Samuel. But the truth is, I was also protecting myself. I was afraid of being alone, of failing Samuel, of what might happen if Edward found us. Ethan was silent for a long moment, his fingers gently stroking Samuel's back as the child slept against him. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. You should have told me the truth, Willow, from the beginning. I know. Tears stung her eyes. I was a coward. I thought if you knew, you would reject us both. You didn't give me the chance to decide for myself. There was hurt in his voice now, unmistakable. You made that choice for me. Yes, she couldn't deny it. And now that you know the truth, what will you do? He looked down at Samuel, sleeping peacefully, one chubby cheek pressed against his shoulder. When he raised his eyes to Willow again, there was a resolve in them that made her breath catch. What I promised I would do the day you arrived with him, we'll raise him together. His voice was steady, certain. Samuel is my son now, in every way that matters. No fancy lawyer from back east is going to change that. Relief washed over her so intensely she felt light-headed. You mean it, even knowing I lied to you, I won't pretend the lie doesn't hurt, he admitted. Trust is earned, Willow, and you've damaged ours. But Samuel is innocent in all this. He deserves a home, parents who love him, stability. His expression softened as he looked at the sleeping child. Besides, how could I not love him? He's been mine since the moment I saw him. The simple declaration broke something in Willow. Tears spilled down her cheeks as months of fear and guilt and longing poured out of her. "I'm so sorry, Ethan. I never meant to hurt you. I was just so afraid." "I know." He reached across the table with his free hand to take hers. "But you're not alone anymore. Whatever comes next, we face it together." "Together," she echoed, clinging to his hand like a lifeline, and for the first time since she had fled Pittsburgh with a baby who wasn't hers and a heart full of fear, Willow truly believed everything might be all right. Harrington returned the next morning, as promised, this time accompanied by a local lawyer. He had retained a sharp-featured man named Simmons, whom Willow had seen at church, but never spoken to. Ethan met them on the porch, arms crossed over his chest, his stance making it clear they were not welcome inside. "Mr. Irwin," Harrington began, "I hope you've had time to consider the situation rationally. My client is prepared to be generous." "Is that so?" Ethan's voice was deceptively calm. "Well, I've considered the situation quite thoroughly, and here's what I've decided. Samuel stays here with his mother and me. End of discussion." Simmons cleared his throat. "Mr. Irwin, the law is quite clear on this matter. Without a legal adoption, which Mrs. Irwin does not have, her claim to the child is tenuous at best." "And Edward Greene's claim is better," Ethan challenged. "A man who never laid eyes on the boy, who cares only for some family legacy." "Mr. Greene is the child's closest living relative," Harrington countered. "Blood counts for something in the eyes of the law. So does a stable, loving home," Ethan replied, "which is exactly what Samuel has here." The lawyers exchanged glances. "We were hoping to avoid involving the courts," Harrington said, "but if you insist on being difficult, let me save you some time," Ethan interrupted. "I spoke with Judge Wilson in Cheyenne by telegraph this morning. He's an old friend of my father's. Happens to be the senior circuit judge for this territory." Both lawyers stiffened at this information. "The judge is very interested in the case," Ethan continued. "Particularly in the part where a Pittsburgh lawyer crosses state lines to try and remove a child from his home based on the claims of a distant relative who's never shown any interest in the boy's welfare." "This is a legal matter," Simmons began, but Ethan cut him off. "It's a family matter. Samuel is my son. I've claimed him legally, publicly, and in the eyes of God. My wife has raised him from infancy. We are his family." "Your claim is based on fraudulent information," Harrington insisted. "Once the court learns the truth," Ethan took a step forward, his voice dropping. "The truth is that Samuel's parents died in an epidemic. The truth is that Willow cared for him when no one else would. The truth is that we're the only parents he's ever known." His eyes narrowed. "What will the court say when they learn that Edward Greene never once inquired about the boy's welfare until he realized there might be some financial advantage in claiming him?" Harrington's confident facade faltered slightly. "Mr. Greene's motivations are not the issue here, aren't they?" Ethan countered. "A judge might think differently, especially when he compares a distant relative who's never met the child to two loving parents who have raised him since infancy." Simmons, sensing the tide turning, cleared his throat again. "Perhaps there's room for compromise here. Mr. Greene might consider allowing the boy to remain with you, provided certain conditions are met regarding his education and upbringing." "There's no compromise to be had," Ethan said flatly. "Samuel is our son, not a bargaining chip, not a piece of property to be negotiated over. And if Edward Greene wants to press the issue, he's welcome to come out here himself and try." The steel in Ethan's voice left no room for argument. Harrington, recognizing defeat, nodded stiffly. "I'll convey your position to my client, but I warn you, Mr. Irwin, this matter is far from settled." "I believe it is," Ethan replied. "Good day, gentlemen." After the lawyers had departed, Willow emerged from the house where she had been listening by the window, Samuel on her hip. "Do you really think it's over?" Ethan turned to her, his expression softening. "Not entirely. But I meant what I said about Judge Wilson. He's a good man who believes children belong with those who love them, not those who see them as assets. And if Edward comes himself, then he'll find that taking a child from his home isn't as easy as sending a lawyer to do his dirty work." Ethan reached out to touch Samuel's cheek. "Besides, he'd have to go through me first." The certainty in his voice reassured her, but a shadow of worry remained. I've put you in a terrible position, Ethan, fighting a legal battle that isn't truly yours. It is mine, he corrected her. You and Samuel are my family, your battles are my battles. She studied his face, seeing the determination there, the protectiveness. But beyond that, she saw something else, something that made her heart skip a beat. You love him, don't you? Truly love him. Of course I do, Ethan said simply. He's my son. He paused, then added more softly, and I love his mother too, though she drives me to distraction sometimes with her stubborn pride and her secrets. The declaration, so casually made, stole her breath. Ethan, you don't have to say anything, he assured her. I know this isn't what you expected when you answered my advertisement, but it's the truth. Somewhere between your arrival with this little fellow and today, I fell in love with you both. Tears welled in her eyes, but these were different from the tears of fear and guilt she had shed the day before. These were tears of joy, of amazement, of relief. I love you too, she whispered. I think I have for a long time, but I was too afraid to admit it, even to myself. Afraid of what would happen if you knew the truth about Samuel, about me. No more secrets, he said, taking her free hand in his. No more fears. Whatever comes next, we face it together. Together, she agreed, and this time the word was a promise, not just an echo. Edward Greene arrived in Copper Ridge 2 weeks later, traveling in a private rail car to the nearest station, then by hired carriage to the small town. His arrival caused a stir among the townsfolk, who had never seen such finery or such obvious Eastern wealth. He took rooms at the hotel and sent a formal invitation to the Irwins, requesting the pleasure of their company for dinner that evening. Ethan had wanted to refuse outright, but Willow counseled caution. Let's at least hear what he has to say, she suggested. Running and hiding didn't work before. Perhaps facing him directly is the better approach. I don't trust him, Ethan said flatly. Nor do I, she admitted. But I want to look him in the eye when he tries to take my son from me. I want him to see exactly what he's up against. In the end, they agreed to meet Edward at the hotel dining room, but without Samuel, who remained at the ranch with Mrs. Cooper standing guard. Edward Greene was a surprise. Willow had expected someone older, more like the grasping villain she had built up in her mind. Instead, she found a man in his early 30s, handsome in a polished way, with Thomas's same dark hair and eyes. He rose when they entered the private dining room he had reserved, his manner impeccably polite. Mrs. Irwin, Mr. Irwin, thank you for accepting my invitation. He gestured to the table, set with fine china and crystal that must have been brought with him from the East. Please be seated. Mr. Greene, Willow acknowledged stiffly as Ethan pulled out her chair. I confess I'm surprised you made the journey yourself. After Harrington's report of his reception, I felt a more personal approach was warranted. Edward signaled to a waiter, who began serving the first course, a clear soup that seemed wildly out of place in the Frontier Hotel. Besides, I was curious to see the woman who had spirited away my young cousin. Samuel is not your cousin, Ethan said bluntly. He's our son. Edward smiled thinly. In a manner of speaking, perhaps, but not by blood or law as I understand it. The law is still to be determined, Willow replied, her voice steadier than she felt. As for blood, it seems to me you place a great deal of importance on it for someone who never once inquired about Samuel's welfare until now. Edward sipped his soup, seemingly unruffled by her accusation. I didn't know of his existence until recently. Thomas and I were not close. Then why this sudden interest in his ward? Ethan asked. Ward, not son, Edward corrected, and my interest is simple. The Greene family has certain traditions, certain obligations. Thomas was the last direct male descendant of our line. With his death, those responsibilities fall to me. And what do these responsibilities have to do with Samuel? Willow demanded. Edward set down his spoon. The Greene family has maintained a certain position in Pittsburgh society for generations. That position comes with expectations of education, of breeding, of continuity. Samuel, as Thomas's legal ward, has a place in that continuity. As what? Some kind of living statue to the Greene family name. Ethan's disgust was evident. He's a child, not a monument. He's a child who deserves the advantages I can provide, Edward countered. The finest schools, cultural opportunities, social connections that will serve him well throughout his life. He's a child who deserves to be loved, Willow said fiercely. To be raised by parents who see him as a precious gift, not an obligation or a means to continue some family legacy. Edward studied her for a moment, then surprised her by nodding. I believe you do love the boy, Mrs. Irwin. I'm not a monster, despite what you may think. But love alone is not enough. What can you offer him here? A life of hardship on a frontier ranch, an education at some primitive local school, society that consists of cowboys and farmers. We offer him a home, Ethan said simply. Parents who would die for him, values that matter more than social standing or fancy schooling. Noble sentiments, Edward conceded, but ultimately short-sighted. In 10 years, in 20, when Samuel is a man, what opportunities will he have had? What doors will be open to him? Whatever doors he chooses to walk through, Willow replied. Based on his own dreams and desires, not those prescribed for him by family tradition, Edward sighed, setting aside his barely touched soup. I had hoped we might find common ground, but I see you're determined to be difficult. Very well, let me be direct. I am prepared to offer you a substantial sum in exchange for relinquishing all claims to the boy. The blatant attempt to buy Samuel stunned them both into momentary silence. You're trying to purchase a child, Ethan finally managed, his voice low with anger. I'm offering compensation for your attachment and care thus far, Edward corrected. $10,000, a small fortune in a place like this, enough to expand your ranch significantly, I imagine, or perhaps move to a more civilized area. There is not enough money in the world, Willow said, rising from her chair, to make me give up my son. The fact that you would even suggest such a thing tells me everything I need to know about what kind of guardian you would be. Edward remained seated, his expression cooling. I had hoped to resolve this amicably, but I see that won't be possible. In that case, you leave me no choice but to pursue legal remedies. Ethan stood as well, placing a protective hand on Willow's back. Pursue whatever you like, Greene, but understand this. Samuel stays with us. No court in this territory will take a child from a loving home to hand him over to a stranger, no matter how rich or well-connected. We shall see, Edward replied. The law often favors those with the resources to navigate it effectively. And sometimes, Ethan countered, it favors what's right over what's expedient. They left without finishing the meal, walking out into the cool evening air with Edward's threat hanging over them like a storm cloud. He's determined, Willow said as they untied their horses from the hitching post. So are we, Ethan replied, helping her mount before swinging up onto his own horse. And we have something he doesn't. What's that? The truth on our side. He turned his horse toward home. And a whole town who'll stand with us when they understand what's at stake. Ethan's prediction proved accurate. When word spread of Edward Greene's attempt to take Samuel away, the people of Copper Ridge rallied around the Irwins in a way Willow would never have expected. Mrs. Cooper organized the Ladies' Aid Society to write letters of support. Reverend Walsh promised to testify to their character and fitness as parents. Even Mr. Phillips, who had been so pointedly curious about Samuel's parentage, declared loudly in his store that no Eastern dandy has any business taking a child from folks who love him. Edward, meanwhile, had set his legal machinery in motion. Papers were filed, hearings scheduled before Judge Wilson in Cheyenne. Lawyer Simmons made increasingly urgent visits to the ranch, trying to persuade them to settle. Mr. Greene is prepared to increase his offer to $15,000, Simmons informed them during one such visit. Plus a stipend for the boy's care until arrangements can be made for his transport east. The answer is still no, Ethan said firmly, showing the lawyer to the door, and it will remain no, regardless of the amount offered. As the date of the hearing approached, Willow found herself alternating between determination and terror. The thought of losing Samuel was unbearable, yet the possibility loomed larger each day. The night before they were to leave for Cheyenne, she sat on the edge of Samuel's bed, watching him sleep. He had graduated from the crib to a small bed, though he was still so tiny within it. His dark curls were damp from his bath, his cheeks flushed with sleep. One small hand clutched the toy horse Ethan had carved for him, "I can't lose him, Ethan," she whispered when her husband joined her. "I just can't. You won't." Ethan sat beside her, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "We won't. Judge Wilson is a fair man. He'll see that Samuel belongs here with us. But what if Edward's money sways him? What if the law really does favor blood relatives over those who actually raise the child? Then we'll appeal, and if that fails, we'll take Samuel and go somewhere Edward can never find us." His voice was calm but determined. "I meant what I said, Willow. Samuel is our son. No court ruling, no amount of money, nothing will change that." She leaned into him, drawing strength from his certainty. "When did you become the optimistic one in this marriage?" "Around the time you taught me what was really worth fighting for." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "Now come to bed. Tomorrow will be a long day." Cheyenne was larger and more developed than Copper Ridge, with proper streets and substantial buildings that spoke of growing prosperity. The territorial courthouse stood in the center of town, an imposing structure of red brick with white stone trim. Edward Greene was already there when they arrived, accompanied by Harrington and two other men in expensive suits whom Willow assumed were additional lawyers. Simmons hurried up to meet them, looking harried. "Greene has brought in legal counsel from Denver," he informed them in a low voice. "High-priced talent, and he's been in town for 3 days, speaking with the judge socially." "Wilson won't be swayed by that," Ethan said, though Willow noted a flicker of concern in his eyes. "Let's hope not," Simmons replied, "because Greene seems very confident." The hearing was held in Judge Wilson's chambers rather than the open courtroom, for which Willow was grateful. The judge, a stout man with a shock of white hair and penetrating blue eyes, listened patiently as both sides presented their arguments. Edward's lawyers painted a picture of a bereaved relative seeking to provide a child with advantages his current situation could never offer. They emphasized Willow's deception, her flight from Pittsburgh with a child not legally hers, and the Greene family's prominent standing and resources. Simmons, in turn, presented affidavits from the citizens of Copper Ridge attesting to the Irwins' character and their devotion to Samuel. He argued passionately that stability and love outweighed blood ties, especially when those ties were as distant as Edward's. Through it all, Judge Wilson remained impassive, occasionally asking a clarifying question but giving no hint of his leanings. When both sides had finished, he leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled before him. "This is a complex case," he said finally. "On the one hand, we have a blood relative with the means to provide materially for the child. On the other, we have a couple who has raised him from infancy, providing love and stability during his formative months." He turned to Edward. "Mr. Greene, you claim to have the boy's best interests at heart, yet you've never met him. How can you be certain that uprooting him from the only home he's known would benefit him?" Edward straightened in his chair. "Your Honor, I believe that the advantages I can provide, educational, social, and financial, outweigh the temporary discomfort of transition." "Children are remarkably adaptable," the judge nodded thoughtfully, then turned to Willow. "Mrs. Irwin, you took the child without legal authority to do so. Some might call that kidnapping. I call it saving a life," she replied with quiet dignity. "Samuel's parents were dead. His nearest relative, Catherine, Walsh's sister, had also died in the epidemic. Edward showed no interest in his welfare until he realized there might be some advantage to claiming him." She met the judge's gaze steadily. "I may have acted outside the law, Your Honor, but I acted out of love and concern for a child who had lost everything." Judge Wilson studied her for a long moment, then shifted his attention to Ethan. "Mr. Irwin, you married Mrs. Greene knowing she had a child by another man, is that correct?" "I married Willow knowing she came with Samuel, yes," Ethan confirmed. "The details of his parentage became clear later, but it changed nothing for me. He was my son from the moment I accepted responsibility for him. And if this court rules in Mr. Greene's favor, what then?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "With all due respect, Your Honor, I can't accept any ruling that would take my son from his home and the parents who love him. I would exhaust every legal avenue available, and if those failed—" He left the implication hanging. Judge Wilson's eyebrows rose slightly. "Are you suggesting you would defy a court order, Mr. Irwin?" "I'm suggesting, Your Honor, that there are higher laws than those made by men. The bond between parent and child is one of them. A murmur ran through the chamber at this bold statement. Edward's lawyers exchanged glances, clearly sensing an advantage in Ethan's defiance, but Judge Wilson surprised them all by nodding slowly. Eloquently put, Mr. Irwin. He shuffled the papers before him, then set them aside. I've heard enough arguments for today. Before I rule, however, there's one voice we haven't heard from the child himself. Samuel is too young to testify, Your Honor, Harrington objected. He's not even 2 years old. I'm not suggesting he testify, Judge Wilson clarified, but I would like to observe him with both parties. Tomorrow morning, I want the child brought here. Mr. and Mrs. Irwin will have 1 hour with him in my presence, followed by Mr. Greene. Edward looked stunned. Your Honor, I hardly think, if you wish to claim guardianship of this child, Mr. Greene, it seems reasonable that you should at least meet him first, the judge interrupted. Unless you find that prospect objectionable, no, of course not, Edward backtracked. I merely thought it unnecessary. I'll be the judge of what's necessary in my courtroom, Wilson said dryly. Tomorrow at 9 o'clock, this session is adjourned. Outside the courthouse, Willow turned to Ethan, hope rising for the first time since the hearing began. He's going to see for himself how Samuel is with us and how he is with a complete stranger. That can only work in our favor. It's a good sign, Ethan agreed cautiously. Wilson's a perceptive man. He'll see what's right in front of him, that Samuel belongs with us. The next morning, they arrived at the courthouse with Samuel freshly bathed and dressed in his best clothes. He was in good spirits, chattering away in his limited vocabulary as they waited in an antechamber for Judge Wilson. When the judge entered, Samuel looked up with curiosity but showed no fear. Wilson crouched down to the child's level, smiling kindly. Hello there, young man, he said. That's quite the fine horse you have. Samuel held up the wooden toy Ethan had carved. Horse, he agreed solemnly. Etah made. Etah, the judge looked questioningly at Ethan. His name for me, Ethan explained. He hasn't quite mastered Ethan yet. Wilson nodded, then turned back to Samuel. And who is this lady? He asked, pointing to Willow. Mama, Samuel replied immediately, reaching for her. Willow's heart swelled at the simple declaration. For the next hour, Judge Wilson observed them quietly as they played with Samuel, read to him, comforted him when he grew tired and fussy. They weren't putting on a show. This was simply their normal interaction with their son, the rhythms and routines they had established over months together. When the hour was up, Wilson thanked them and asked them to wait outside while he spent time with Edward and Samuel alone. Leaving Samuel was difficult, especially when he began to cry as Willow handed him to the judge, but they had no choice. They waited in tense silence in the hallway, straining to hear any sound from within the chamber. After what seemed an eternity but was probably only 15 minutes, the door opened and Edward emerged, looking distinctly uncomfortable. The child is upset, he said stiffly. The judge suggested it would be best if you took him now. Willow hurried into the room to find Samuel red-faced and howling, arms outstretched toward the door where she had disappeared. Judge Wilson was attempting to comfort him, but the child was having none of it. Mama, Samuel cried when he saw her. Mama, Etah. She gathered him into her arms, soothing him with soft words and gentle touches until his sobs subsided to hiccups. Ethan joined them, his hand on Samuel's back, a united front of comfort and security. Judge Wilson watched this reunion with thoughtful eyes. I believe I've seen enough, he said finally. We'll reconvene in my chambers in 1 hour for my ruling. That hour was the longest of Willow's life. They took Samuel outside to the small park across from the courthouse, letting him toddle through the grass and explore while they waited. His resilience amazed her. Already he had recovered from his distress, laughing as Ethan swung him into the air. No matter what happens in there, she said to Ethan as they watched Samuel examine a dandelion with solemn concentration, I want you to know that you've been the best father any child could ask for. Ethan's eyes were suspiciously bright as he looked at her. And you've been the best mother. Samuel is the luckiest boy in the territory to have you. We're the lucky ones, she corrected, leaning into his side. To have found each other, to have him. When they returned to the judge's chambers, Edward and his lawyers were already seated. Wilson entered a few minutes later, his expression giving nothing away. "I've considered this case carefully," he began, weighing the legal arguments presented by both sides, the affidavits submitted, and most importantly, my own observations of the child with both parties. He looked directly at Edward. "Mr. Greene, there is no doubt that you could provide Samuel with material advantages, the best schools, social connections, financial security. These are not insignificant considerations." Edward sat a little straighter, a hint of triumph in his expression. "However," Wilson continued, "there are other considerations that, in my judgment, carry even greater weight. The stability of a loving home. The bond between child and parent, a bond that forms not through blood but through daily acts of care and love." He turned to the Irwins. "What I observed today was a child deeply attached to the only parents he has known. A child secure in their love, thriving in their care. To sever that bond would, in my estimation, cause profound harm, regardless of the material advantages offered as compensation." Willow's hand found Ethan's, squeezing tightly as hope bloomed in her chest. "Therefore," Judge Wilson concluded, "it is the ruling of this court that custody and guardianship of the child known as Samuel Greene, now Samuel Irwin, shall remain with Ethan and Willow Irwin with all the rights and responsibilities thereof." Joy exploded through Willow like summer lightning. She turned to Ethan, seeing her own elation mirrored in his face. "Furthermore," the judge added, silencing Edward's lawyers who had begun to protest, "I am issuing an order for formal adoption proceedings to begin immediately, legitimizing in law what is already fact in practice, that Samuel is the son of Ethan and Willow Irwin in every way that matters." Edward rose, his face flushed with anger. "This is outrageous. You're allowing them to keep a child they essentially kidnapped based on nothing more than sentiment." "I'm allowing a child to remain with the parents who have raised him based on what is clearly in his best interest," Wilson corrected sharply. "And if you truly had the boy's welfare at heart, Mr. Greene, you would recognize that as well." Edward stared at him for a long moment, then abruptly turned on his heel and left the chamber, his lawyers hurrying after him. Judge Wilson turned back to the Irwins. "I suggest you complete the adoption paperwork before you leave Cheyenne. My clerk will provide the necessary forms." His stern expression softened. "And may I offer my congratulations. It's clear to anyone with eyes that you are a family in the truest sense of the word." "Thank you, Your Honor," Ethan said, his voice rough with emotion. "We're grateful for your wisdom." Outside the courthouse, with Samuel secure in her arms and Ethan by her side, Willow felt as though she were floating. The nightmare that had haunted her for so long was over. Samuel was truly legally theirs. "We did it," she whispered, tears of joy streaming down her face. "He's really ours." "He always was," Ethan replied, wrapping his arms around them both. "The judge just made it official." Samuel, oblivious to the momentous nature of the day, patted Willow's wet cheeks with his small hands. "Mama's sad." "No, sweet boy," she laughed through her tears. "Mama is very, very happy." 1 year later, the ranch was transformed. White bunting hung from the porch railings, tables laden with food stood beneath the shade of canvas awnings, and wildflowers gathered by the children of Copper Ridge filled every available container. Willow stood in the bedroom window, watching as the townspeople arrived in wagons and on horseback for the celebration. It was Samuel's 3rd birthday, but it was more than that. It was the anniversary of their legal victory, of the day they became a true family in the eyes of the law. "Are you ready?" Ethan asked, appearing in the doorway. "The guests are arriving and the birthday boy is getting impatient." She turned to him, smoothing down her new dress, a gift from Ethan, ordered specially from Denver. "How do I look?" His eyes warmed as they traveled over her. "Beautiful." "As always." "Flatterer," she accused, but couldn't help smiling at the appreciation in his gaze. "It's not flattery if it's true," he countered, crossing the room to take her in his arms. "Have I told you today how much I love you? You might have mentioned it," she murmured against his lips. "But I don't mind hearing it again." "I love you, Willow Irwin," he obliged, "more than I ever thought possible." "And I love you," she replied, "for your strength, your kindness, your heart." Their kiss was interrupted by the sound of small feet running down the hallway, followed by an excited voice calling, "Mama!" Papa, people here. Samuel burst into the room, his dark curls wild despite Willow's earlier attempts to tame them, his Sunday clothes already showing signs of adventure. There's my big boy, Ethan said, scooping him up. Ready for your party, Samuel nodded enthusiastically. Cake and presents, Willow confirmed, laughing, and all your friends to play with. Jack bring his dog? Samuel asked hopefully. Jack Miller had recently acquired a puppy that had become Samuel's favorite playmate. I imagine he did, Ethan replied. But remember what we talked about, gentle hands with the puppy. Samuel nodded solemnly. Gentle hands, I remember. They made their way downstairs and out onto the porch, where Mrs. Cooper was directing the placement of the last few dishes. The ranch yard was filling with people, not just the townspeople of Copper Ridge, but neighboring ranchers and their families, some who had traveled considerable distances for the celebration. Quite a turnout, Ethan remarked, setting Samuel down to run to where a group of children were playing. People like a good party, Willow replied, though she knew it was more than that. The community had rallied around them during their legal battle, and this celebration was as much for them as it was for the Irwins a shared victory over Eastern money and influence, a validation of the values they held dear. The day passed in a blur of food and games, music from a fiddle player Jack Miller had brought, and more laughter than the ranch had heard in all the years before Willow and Samuel had arrived. Samuel, the center of attention, bloomed under the affection showered on him, proudly showing off his new skills counting to 10, reciting his alphabet, the simple prayers Willow had taught him. As the sun began to set, turning the sky to a canvas of pink and gold, Ethan found Willow sitting on the porch steps, watching Samuel play a gentle game of tug with Jack's puppy. Tired? He asked, settling beside her. A little, she admitted, but happy, so very happy. He took her hand, his thumb brushing over her wedding ring. I have something for you, a gift. It's Samuel's birthday, not mine, she reminded him. Humor me, he said, reaching into his pocket to withdraw a small velvet pouch. This is long overdue. Curious, she opened the pouch, tipping its contents into her palm. A gold ring winked up at her in the fading light, set with a small but perfect diamond that caught the sunset's glow. Ethan, she breathed. It's beautiful, but I don't understand. When we married, it was an arrangement, he explained, taking the ring from her palm. You got a simple band because that was all it was supposed to be, a practical union, but it became so much more. His eyes held hers, full of the love that had grown between them. I want you to have a proper ring for a proper marriage, one based on love, not convenience. Tears stung her eyes as he slid the ring onto her finger above her wedding band. It's perfect, she whispered. Thank you. He leaned in to kiss her, a gentle press of lips that held the promise of more to come later when they were alone. Papa, Mama, look! Samuel's excited voice broke the moment. They turned to see him running toward them, the puppy at his heels, his face alight with joy. Dog likes me. Of course he does, Ethan laughed, catching Samuel as he launched himself into his father's arms. Who wouldn't like a fine boy like you? Willow watched them together, her heart full to bursting with love for them, both her husband and her son. The family she had never dared to dream of finding when she fled east with a baby who wasn't hers and a future that seemed bleak at best. Life on the frontier was hard, the work endless, the comforts few compared to the life she had known in Pittsburgh. But sitting here on the porch of their home, with the man she loved beside her and their son laughing in his arms, Willow knew without a doubt that she had found the richest life possible. As the last light of day faded into dusk, and the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the Wyoming sky, Willow silently thanked whatever fate or providence had guided her steps to Copper Ridge, to Ethan Irwin's door, to this moment of perfect contentment. The mail-order bride with a baby who had been mocked and doubted had found her place at last, not just a house, but a home, not just a husband, but a partner, not just safety, but love. And in that love, all three of them had found redemption, healing, and the promise of a future brighter than any they could have imagined alone.